Welcome back to Get Ready With Your Mama. It is cold, and I kind of like this lighting, so I decided that I would use it to film my, this is fun. It is cold. I'm warming my car, and I decided to use this lighting and this opportunity to film what I thought about consciousness. So, this is kind of like the topic that I feel like is vibing through the hive brain, through the collective subconscious. I don't know. I guess if only you're a nerd. But I also feel like people are talking about this stuff too a little bit. So, I'm talking about it because I actually think it's going to lead into the finishing of my novel. I'm finally at that point in processing stuff, and plus we just got another computer, so now I can write free of having to take my husband's computer that he uses for work. So that's kind of helpful. But yes, so consciousness. What do I think about it? Just meta thinking about stuff. Well, okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to attack this, from what angle or whatever. Well, first of all, I'm going to speculate as to why scientists are at the point of trying to understand cognition. And to me, it's we've laid down the groundwork of most things. As far as biology, we've found a lot of the species that we're going to find. We're going to continue to be able to find that. And as far as that's microbiology and biology in general, I feel evolution has been kind of beat to death. And it's still something that we're learning about, but has kind of, even it's seeped its way into evolutionary theology, and at least the idea that we all adapt to environments, whether or not we're predisposed for them or not, is sort of general canon for all different types of points of view. And I just feel in all the different fields, engineering, the basic science, the hardcore sciences, even just computer sciences, a lot of the basic stuff, the basic hardwiring, the basic information that you can gather in theories are sort of there. And then as far as in medicine, we've really outlined what we've explored the human body. The one thing left is the mind. The one thing, this is why I wanted to study language development. When I was in undergrad, I was really fascinated by it because it's the one thing that we still really haven't been able to figure out. We generally understand the heart. We don't understand the endocrine system, because everything that's left over, including my favorite is the endocrine system, because I work with mothers and babies. But I just think it's freaking awesome because to me it's one of the most powerful systems. It has so many different things it drives, and primal instincts, and just things that we don't understand about how it works and how it calibrates, and it's just interesting. But that all originates back to the idea of there being some sort of a mind origin of not just the structures of the minds, which we've been able to dissect minds, and we've been able to dissect diseased minds, and just sort of kind of figure out what we think the pathologies of accidents or diseases are. But now it's more, how does this stuff work? How is it actually working together? So there's that. And then there's the whole idea that a physicist can pick apart particles and matter and study it based upon what they can see. But when it comes down to the brain and ideas and thoughts, they can talk about the mechanics or the wiring of, we think that the synapses connect this way, or the neurons do this, or we know the general landscape of what the motor planning strip is, and what the, what sensory does when it talks to it, or what happens when you have a stroke, or things like that. But the idea of where is your soul? What makes a person a person? What is the essence of being, to be or not to be? Those are more poetic and philosophical anyway, but there really is a scientific answer for literally everything. But what's cool about it, at least from my perspective, it is straight nebulous. It is just well, we can postulate this, but in general, we just don't know. So I'm going to go down to, the level of language, and I'm also going to start where my language development professor started. He started with 8 weeks of like us obsessing about the optic nerve and vision and how that arises, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Also, my son definitely saw a visual therapist, and like all of our primitive reflexes like start out in the brainstem and start out with things like sucking and then vision. And when we're first born, the only thing that we can see it's like 8 inches in front of us, and we can barely focus, and we can only see contrast, and that's why we can see our mother's breast, nipples, and we can also just see our moms. We can focus on their face to be able to form the first lasting bond, which is also the first sense of self. If you learn so I've studied psychology and neurology a lot in my first undergrad, had a lot of neurology, and my second I studied psychology along with nursing, and so I kind of have at least have a base for this. But okay, so occipital. So vision is in the back of your head, right? And we know that when like a baby is in utero, when the cells first start dividing, at first they're just all stem cells. Like the idea that they could become any type of cell in your body. It could become part of a kidney, part of a nose, part of a hair. Well, actually, that's all dead cells, sorry. Part of a pituitary gland, part of a spinal cord. And of course, the spinal cord is the central form of our CNS, or our central nervous system, which is where all of our feeling, and by feeling, I mean you actually can physically feel something, you sensate it, whether that be through the senses of like touch, smell, sight, hearing, and then all of those senses fire back through electricity to our spines and eventually up into our our brain stem, which then sends out mixed signals throughout our body, like our brain, to be able to so if it's sending out pictures, it's sending it to it literally is creating if there's memory and then there's pictures, so it's creating a new picture in your occipital lobe and then sending that to memory, which is where you would store like Wernicke's and Broca. So it's like one of those is language, one of those is planning, but it's the part of your brain that will be storing like active working memories that you have, okay? And like part of those will be in your working memory and will combine with your executive functioning, which we're only technically using when we're creating memories in real time. Working memory, short-term memory, we're only using like 5% of our brains or something, right? And then, or less, probably much less. I just grabbed a number. But then the rest of our brain is either in a dormant stage, or we're not using that part of it, whether it be our spatial and our like our motor planning synapses and our like all the stuff that's in parietal lobe and like way just up here, motor strip, and our like sensating like strip, okay? They're touching and they're all up there. Anyway, little homunculus, a little man, upside down. Okay, so, and then you don't use all of your executive functioning all the time. You're not using your entire visual cortex. You're not using all of your things that you use to do math or to create or to fall in love all the time, right? But a part of you that is working all the time, besides your working memory and your executive functioning and your senses, to figure out like where we are in time and space, about propriocentration, figuring out where your body is literally located in time and space, but also where you are in memory in time and space. Is this fall? Is this, this is smell remind me of my mother? Is it like all of that? There's this other part of us that is deep in our reptilian brain, and as well as our pons, medulla, all of our brain stem, is a working emotional visceral memory that like when you get mad, your medulla, isn't it your medulla? Yeah, I think it flares open, and then you're in a reptilian state in which it's difficult for you to hear language or to think logically or to use other parts of your brain because you're using your primitive base and you're freaking out. We also know that when people are in trauma, so say they have a bunch of emotions stored from some specific type of trauma, they experience like a mind-body disassociation where either they come almost all the way out of their bodies or they go just to the point inside of their memory or their brain where they can just pull back and they're not really here. or they're reliving parts of what they've done before. And it's almost like you're not talking to them. You are, but because if we always use the word triggered, like nowadays, and people generally know what that means, but it means that like if you're experiencing an experience, an emotion, a thing that is familiar to you, but not quite the same, but sort of the same, and it's enough to trigger you or set you into a state of not feeling regulated and being pulled back into your trauma and reliving it, then that stuff's stored really deep down low, where your subconscious is. Now, if we go back to Jung likes to talk about cognitive functioning. So he was kind of using the idea that we all have dominant and subdominant portions of our brains and portions of our consciousness that we use to both create memories, experience the world, decipher how to navigate within it. We have preferences and dominances, and we're all a little bit different. But at the bottom of our preferences are our lower functions that we're not as good at, and they might even trigger us into like being, since they're harder for us to use, we'll act younger, but we also might be stuck, and they might be triggering and pulling us from these very base level nuances from our childhoods that, like, any trauma or things that we needed to work through or stages of development we missed out on, or things that like we won't just look at in our normal lives, because what happens when you're using another part of your brain as opposed to whatever it is that you're not using, that comes out in like this weird subconscious trauma, like I almost said alien life form, but like shadow experience, that by the time you get to your midlife, you can start to kind of see some of, catch a few, you can kind of see some of these patterns emerging where you're like, oh, that's my issue. That's like my lifelong issue. Or even earlier than that. I mean, it's sort of interesting to think about like teenagers, because they're so hormone driven, but like emotional and charged up on chemicals that are pulsating through their bodies, and they are like fully swinging. By then they're using their lower functions. They probably used a lot of their saviors for a long time, and they're just swinging these things around, making all sorts of like what we like kind of feel like are mistakes, but really they're just learning, because learning is living and living is life. And so anyway, but like, but then by the time they're a 40-year-old, they'll be like sitting there talking about the things, you know, but my ex-wife, blah, 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 or like, you know, whatever it is, they finally are trying to kind of face it. And then I think that as we disintegrate, I think as we age, we also we're very, very aware of it. So sometimes we've either grown out of it, grown into it. We start either using our lower functions better, or we have locked down hardcore in some sort of like a struggle with our upper functions, or even our upper combined with our lower, or our own egos, or our past, or whatever it is we're going to get stuck in. And then we just lock in, and that's where you see like people who just really are miserable as they get closer to like death and like just older age. So consciousness, you know, I want to say that if I think about language development, that's the best way that I can sort of get to where I think it exists, besides what I just described. And like, I think consciousness is this combination of your working memory and your like conscious awareness of where I am in time and space right now, and that sense of tracking time now and tracking yourself in your space, your time, your context, your relationships, and having a gentle dialogue with the underneath part, which is everything that exists in your reptilian brain and in your working memory, your broken memory of like things that have hurt you in the past, or past visualizations of bad things, or emotions, or relationships, or when you're experiencing trauma, whatever paths were laid into your brain circuiting, and any types of programs that are still running, whether that be like hurtful thoughts that you have, or ways that you do relationships, and you've been doing them since your like primal relationships with your mother or your caregivers were formed or broken, or whatever it is. It's like this weird little dialogue, and it's checking to say, are we okay? Are we moving in the right direction? Do we like what's going on? Do we know what we've done? Do we know where we're going? What do I need to accomplish? Like, what do I need to survive? this sort of weird dialogue that happens, like, creates the amount of self, because, like, I'm trying to take apart the hardware and put it back together and explain where the origin is. And in the center of that is, like, id, or, like, yeah, that's what Freud called id. And I feel like your superego also plays into that, but it's like this amalgamation of the future, the past, the present, all talking to each other. And what we know about language development is interesting and might be the beginning of where I would like to define consciousness. And I know that I think two people will understand this, and I don't. That's okay. This is just where I'm at. But this is based upon what I've gathered in my in my studies or whatever, and it's kind of old too. But anyway, when you first learn language, so I'm sorry, I'll go back to the optic nerve. When you first start seeing things, at first it's just this upside down. Your optic nerve takes in what it can see, flips it upside down and backwards into the back of your head, and then depending on what you're seeing and smelling and tasting and whatever, it creates a memory that then goes into your associations in your word bank or your visual memories, and you make this like almost like a video of what's going on right now, or snapshots here and there depending on how your brain does it. And when we first start doing language, like when we first start hearing sounds and different things, like when kids hear sounds and they're starting to make associations with language, at first they're just deciphering sounds and they're hearing that, and it's repetition of being S is S, S is S, and they listen really closely to their mothers, and they have the propensity to be able to pronounce and to say based upon what they hear and then what they produce. So implicit is hearing and understanding, explicit is producing, motor planning, and getting it out. Based upon their mother tongue is what they can then, after about 4 or 5 years of a bunch of that, whether it be their moms or their caregivers and then other people, their brain will literally start to crop or to get rid of the sounds that they don't use in their language, or they've just not picked up. And that'll be, so we don't do like clicks, like some African dialects do clicks, and in English we don't do that. Or like in Asian languages, L's and R's are pretty similar in the sounds, so they don't even have the separate sounds. This can happen with things like diphthongs and fricatives and like all sorts of different things in language that we know. Your brain will crop it out, and it'll be harder for you to learn it because it's using dendrites for space. Now let's talk about what it even looks like for like the dendrites or the senses in your brain to form what's called phonemes, which are sounds with meaning. And there's a difference between a sound, which is a phone, which is just sound existing. We all hear sound. Animals hear sound. But the difference between hearing sound and knowing that it means something, and hearing sound and just hearing it, is that when it has meaning, it's called a phoneme. And we have this memory bank in our brain of these little dendrites that are all like little islands. And when they hear a sound, say they hear th and f. So at first, and th, f, and p maybe. So you'll probably hear a p first, and you'll have a little like land for that. And you'll have a th, and you'll have a little land for that. But until you know where to put the f, if you've never heard it before, but you're still, and you haven't cropped it from your brain, what your brain will do is it will put a little mark next to the TH, further away from the P, next to the TH. It will put it in a bin that's pretty close to it. And at first, it will actually put it with it. It'll say, these are the same sounds. Until your brain starts to hear enough of a difference that it'll shoot one close to the dendrite that goes for TH, it will start to do the F. And eventually, as it hears more and more and more, that F will become its own island, and it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. It will still be close to the TH because in our brain associations, we like to put things that are familiar to each other, near each other, but still enough of differentiation. It will become much, much more differentiated the more that the child hears that. Now, why does this matter? This is where we do our first learning, whether it be through sound, senses. All of our first learning is through touch. Babies come out with the ability to suck and to have a suck reflex, but they still don't know how to breastfeed until they have been sucking, and they learn by every single motion of repetition. So in the beginning, you're run based on these programs that are instincts that are within you that just run. And what those programs are doing, though, is they are creating data. They are creating space. They are creating dendritic processes, much like language and sound. And when you experience light, at first it is overwhelming. Babies really only like to see black and white. They like the contrast because they can focus on the high contrasting difference. And as they develop their sight, it becomes more focused and more focused. And as the sight and the senses of smell, of being touch is a huge important way for babies who aren't touched do not fully develop. Hearing good noises, being in emotionally, they also vibe off of biofeedbacks of their mother. Babies that are first born, if they're in the NICU versus when they're on their mother, when they're on their mother, they have the most perfect vitals ever. So the sensory experience is very, very important and vital to the development of humans and to development of consciousness and to development of memory and space. And consciousness is sort of this in-between understanding of, I believe it to be the electrical circuitry that runs through all the dendrites that pull up our visual experiences, they pull up our language and our hearing and our smells and our tastes, and they create working memory. And then that dialogues. I think the consciousness is a dialoguing thing. It's the language of emotion, memory, language, understanding, and it has to be involved in I think it has to be a biological creature, because I actually think that animals are more likely to form consciousness than machines are, because I think that there's something to be said about the biological process of passing on working memory through generations, which we know exists. So we're not just passing on instincts to eat or to breathe. We also will pass on instincts of like our own memories and lives, and like what we don't even know how all of our adaptability in our environments, how those are passed on by genes. So coded into genes somehow. I believe that that's a combination somewhere in our reptilian little pawns experience that creates consciousness. Consciousness is the dialogue between subconscious and conscience of an individual biological organism with working memory of senses of some sort, normally optic and hearing. And through language, implicit language of that person or thing, that where they have enough that they have a working memory of understanding, and therefore also understanding where they are in time and space now, as well as a history of time and space. And I believe that extreme consciousness also involves having a communicative form of consciousnus, which I think that multi-organ organisms have a different type of consciousness. The way that orcas like communicate in packs, and wolves, they have this really strange, they exist with each other, which I think might be FE or extroverted feeling. I think that I'm kind of talking in circles here, but somewhere in there, I think if you took apart the parts of all of the biological processings and all of the like this leads to that, therefore, like the neurological parts, so it's neurology base of electricity, it's all these circuitries that happen and create memory. But I still feel like if we were to create our own cells, and even to create like our own Frankensteinian monsters out of like not dead body parts, but actual like cells, and created it, I think it'd be really hard for us to create something that had consciousness. I just don't think it exists. I think we can replicate a lot of things that are similar, but I think that the part that's pulling it together is more primal than that, and comes from this biological instinct to survive that I think machines don't necessarily have. And I think you can replicate, but I don't think you can ever do that unless you inject some type of biological processes there. And even then, like our emotions, our feelings, and our intuition, I mean, I guess you could find the circuitry that we're using to jump through intuition, or you can figure out the chemistry that we use to biologically bond as mammals or experience love. But I still feel like there's just more celestial experiences out there that like you just can't explain. And I think it's supposed to be magical. I think it's supposed to be beautiful. I think if you explained it all, it would sort of ruin it, the way that you can explain the spectrum of light and understand a rainbow or a sunset, but it just isn't the same. So, as experiencing it, I don't think you're ever going to be able to touch it. I think you ruin feelings if you explain them too much. That's a difference. Like ideas, if you explain them, the more you explain them, the more clarity you have, the almost better understanding you have. But for feelings, it's very much the opposite process. It's letting go. It's falling back. It's having faith. And I think at the end of this whole race for consciousness, that is actually the answer. That we will figure out that our fate was always to let go of this crazy sin, to want to understand and capture knowledge and capture the understanding of everything, to map everything out, to sequence it, to be able to own knowledge. I think that's a coping mechanism to deal with how imperfect we are and how vulnerable we are, and the fact that we all die and we just turn back into stardust, and how terrifying that is. How terrifying it is that we can't take all of our loved ones with us, and that we will most likely either die or before them or watch them die. And that's terrifying. And to know that we're alone in the universe, at least in our experiences, in our individual experiences, there's no one who understands us more than ourselves. And I think that's terrifying. And so I think the closer they get to that, and the closer it will make some cool discoveries, but I just don't think we're ever going to get there, to the point of understanding what it is to be in existence and what it is to create a conscious creature. I will leave that up to my celestial idea of a father being that created me. But I also know that even if you did understand everything in Oz, you still wouldn't get there. So why are you trying? But anyway, that's what I have. And I guess it's an ENFP, and that's my brain. And of course I would describe consciousness using language and using what I think is NE, which is like making associations. And it's like this, but it's not quite that. To be able to understand something, which is the whole point of learning, the whole point of being, is to experience new and to experience the connections, right? So at least for EPs it is. Anyway, yes, be gentle with yourselves. If you survive this, good for you. But I went kind of fast. I hope that this isn't just another random sprawl of words, but I think it'll make more sense. It's a little bit of my background, a little bit of what I've kind of just lived. So I even started to scratch on the parts of like history, psychology, or like philosophy that I have in there, or theology. I'm trying to stay away from that and kind of pull from more of my medical psychological background to understand this, because that's basically the fields that are trying to go after this. But I would say that if we're here, it's kind of exciting, because I think that we're going to get into more of the ethical things and reasons for why we're here. But I'm sure that people said that at different points in history, and I hope that we're here for longer. I don't know why, but maybe to experience the good, and to maybe learn from the bad. All right, peace out, moon children. Be gentle with yourselves. I'll see you on the next episode.